The panic-stricken voice of World Bank Financial Operations Director Jennifer Brooks echoed through the emergency meeting room at the Washington headquarters as she delivered news that would fundamentally alter the global financial landscape and challenge everything the international monetary system had believed about African economic capabilities. Her breathless announcement that Burkina Faso had paid off its entire $15 billion debt in a single transaction within 72 hours represented more than a financial surprise. It embodied a complete transformation of Africa's relationship with international financial institutions that had controlled the continent's economic destiny for decades. President David Morrison's incredulous response reflected the profound shock reverberating throughout the World Bank's senior leadership as they confronted the impossible reality that an African nation possessed financial resources and strategic capabilities that exceeded their most sophisticated economic models and debt management projections. The assumption that Burkina Faso lacked sufficient reserves to make such massive payments had been fundamental to the bank's risk assessment and lending strategies for African nations. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was calmly reviewing the final stages of his meticulously planned operation with his economic team, displaying the confident satisfaction of a leader whose strategic vision had successfully challenged the established patterns of international financial dominance. His message to Jennifer Brooks carried implications that extended far beyond debt repayment to encompass a fundamental reversal of Africa's position in global financial relationships from debtor to creditor status. The panic atmosphere pervading the World Bank headquarters reflected the institution's growing recognition that their decades-long strategy of maintaining African dependency through debt relationships was being systematically dismantled by African leaders who possessed both the vision and capability to achieve genuine financial independence through innovative monetary policies and strategic resource management. Jennifer Brooks's 25-year career in international finance had never prepared her for witnessing such a dramatic demonstration of African financial capability, particularly the speed and efficiency with which Burkina Faso had executed what appeared to be impossible debt repayment while simultaneously challenging the fundamental assumptions about African economic potential that had guided World Bank policies for generations. Morrison's desperate search through financial documents reflected his inability to comprehend how an African nation could mobilize resources that exceeded the bank's most optimistic projections about African economic capabilities, while also demonstrating the institution's fundamental ignorance about the sophisticated financial strategies that African leaders had been developing through alternative monetary systems and resource management approaches. The revelation that Burkina Faso had conducted the debt repayment using AfriGold rather than traditional currencies represented perhaps the most shocking aspect of the operation, as it demonstrated African success in creating alternative monetary systems that operated independently of Western financial control while also achieving superior performance in international exchange markets. Brooks's report that the AfriGold exchange rate had been so favorable that Burkina Faso had effectively paid $20 billion worth of value for $15 billion in debt obligations revealed the sophisticated nature of African monetary policy and the strategic advantages that AfriGold provided for international financial transactions compared to traditional currency systems controlled by Western central banks. Morrison's growing anxiety about AfriGold's 400% value increase over 6 months reflected broader Western concerns about the implications of African monetary independence for traditional patterns of international financial control and the potential for African currencies to challenge established monetary hierarchies that had maintained Western financial dominance since the Bretton Woods system. The Ouagadougou Crisis Center, where Traoré conducted his strategic meetings, represented the nerve center of a comprehensive financial revolution that extended far beyond simple debt repayment to encompass fundamental transformation of Africa's relationship with international financial institutions and establishment of new patterns of South-South financial cooperation and monetary independence. Finance Minister Dr. Sidao Ouedraogo's detailed report on Operation Freedom revealed the systematic nature of African debt elimination across multiple international institutions including the World Bank, IMF, and Paris Club, representing a coordinated approach to achieving complete financial independence from Western financial control and dependency relationships that had characterized Africa's international economic relationships for decades. The total debt repayment of $28 billion across all major international financial institutions represented unprecedented demonstration of African financial capability while also eliminating the debt service obligations that had historically drained African resources and limited continental development priorities through imposed structural adjustment programs and conditional lending relationships. Traoré's satisfaction with achieving zero external debt status reflected his understanding that debt elimination represented only the first phase of a comprehensive strategy designed to transform Africa from aid recipient to global financial leader through establishment of independent monetary systems and alternative development financing mechanisms that operated outside traditional Western financial control. The second phase of Traoré's strategy, involving establishment of the African Development Fund with $100 billion capital, represented perhaps the most ambitious aspect of his financial revolution, as it positioned Africa as a major provider of international development financing rather than a recipient of conditional aid and loans from Western institutions. Dr. Ouedraogo's shocked response to the scope of African financial resources reflected the broader international underestimation of African economic capabilities and the sophisticated resource mobilization strategies that African leaders had developed through innovative monetary policies and strategic management of continental natural resource wealth. Traoré's revelation that Africa had raised $150 billion through AfriGold bond sales demonstrated unprecedented international confidence in African monetary systems while also establishing African currencies as competitive alternatives to traditional Western financial instruments in global capital markets. The participation of 85 countries in AfriGold bond purchases, led by China's $50 billion investment, reflected growing international recognition of African financial strength and monetary innovation while also demonstrating successful diversification of African financial partnerships beyond traditional Western financial relationships. Economy Minister Dr. Fatima Kone's report on the sophisticated backing of AfriGold through 500 tons of gold, 50 tons of platinum, and 25 tons of diamonds represented comprehensive resource backing that exceeded the reserve diversity of any existing global currency system while also demonstrating African commitment to maintaining monetary stability through tangible asset backing. The three-year strategic development of AfriGold since 2021 had involved systematic strengthening of African financial infrastructure through careful coordination of continental monetary policies and resource management strategies that positioned Africa for independent operation of sophisticated financial systems without external dependency or interference. Central Bank Governor Dr. Ibrahim Traoré's explanation of AfriGold's unique characteristics, including blockchain technology, gold backing, and sustainable energy operations with zero transaction fees and 3-second transfer times, demonstrated technological superiority over traditional banking systems while also providing African populations with access to advanced financial services that exceeded what was available through Western financial institutions. The emergency consultation between Morrison and IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva revealed the broader panic within international financial institutions as they confronted the reality that their primary client base among African nations was systematically eliminating dependency relationships and establishing independent financial capabilities that threatened traditional revenue sources and control mechanisms. Georgieva's shocking revelation that 15 African countries including Mali, Niger, Ghana, and Senegal were simultaneously closing IMF credit facilities using AfriGold demonstrated the coordinated nature of African financial independence movement while also highlighting the comprehensive threat to traditional international financial institution business models and operational sustainability. Morrison's recognition that African nations represented the largest client base for both the World Bank and IMF made the systematic elimination of African dependency relationships an existential threat to institutional survival and operational relevance in a global financial system increasingly dominated by alternative monetary arrangements and South-South financial cooperation. The sophisticated analysis of AfriGold's technological advantages, including blockchain foundation, gold backing, sustainable energy operation, zero transaction fees, and rapid transfer capabilities, revealed African success in developing monetary systems that exceeded the performance characteristics of traditional Western banking infrastructure while also providing superior service quality for users. Traoré's announcement of the African Development Fund's establishment represented the culmination of his strategy to transform Africa from aid recipient to major provider of international development financing, positioning the continent as a competitive alternative to traditional Western development finance institutions. The comprehensive membership of the African Development Fund, including all 54 African nations plus strategic partnerships with China, India, Brazil, and Russia demonstrated successful creation of alternative international financial arrangements that bypassed Western financial institutions while also providing African nations with access to development financing that supported African priorities rather than Western strategic interests. Project Coordinator Dr. Kwame Asonte's outline of the fund's focus areas including technology, energy, and education with customized credit packages for each member nation revealed sophisticated understanding of African development needs and strategic coordination of continental development priorities through independent financial mechanisms. Morrison's emergency board meeting reflected the World Bank's desperate search for strategies to maintain relevance and revenue in a global financial environment increasingly dominated by African financial institutions and alternative monetary systems that provided superior service quality and more favorable terms than traditional Western financial offerings. CFO Michael Johnson's revelation that African credit portfolios represented 35% of the World Bank's total operations highlighted the catastrophic revenue implications of African financial independence for institutional sustainability and operational capacity, while also demonstrating the extent of historical African dependency on Western financial institutions. Research Director Dr. Sarah Williams' analysis of Traoré's systematic 3-year strategy involving coordination of African resources including gold, oil, diamonds, and cobalt through AfriGold backing demonstrated the sophisticated nature of African financial planning and resource management that had enabled rapid achievement of monetary independence and international financial leadership. The congratulatory messages from African leaders, including Ghana's president declaring Traoré achieved Africa's financial liberation and Nigeria's president calling it historic victory for all of us, reflected continental recognition of the broader implications of Burkina Faso's success for African development and international financial relationships. The third phase of Traoré's strategy, involving credit offers to the World Bank, represented perhaps the most shocking reversal of traditional financial relationships, as it positioned Africa as a lender to institutions that had historically controlled African financial access and development priorities through conditional lending and structural adjustment requirements. Dr. Ouedraogo's incredulous response to the proposal that Burkina Faso provide credit to the World Bank reflected the dramatic nature of role reversal that Traoré's strategy had achieved in transforming Africa from borrower to lender in international financial relationships. Traoré's specific offer of $50 billion credit to the World Bank at 3% interest denominated in AfriGold represented both generous terms and strategic positioning of African currency as the preferred medium for international financial transactions, while also demonstrating African capacity to provide development financing that exceeded traditional Western institutional capabilities. Morrison's outraged response to receiving credit offers from Africa reflected the psychological difficulty that Western financial leaders experienced in accepting the reversal of traditional power relationships and African emergence as major players in international financial markets rather than dependent recipients of Western financial assistance. Brooks's pragmatic assessment that African credit terms were actually superior to available alternatives, including 3% interest rates, 10-year terms, and no prepayment penalties, demonstrated the competitive advantages of African financial services compared to traditional Western institutional offerings. CFO Johnson's honest acknowledgement that the World Bank faced liquidity challenges following the loss of African credit portfolios forced institutional leadership to seriously consider African credit offers despite the psychological discomfort of reversing traditional creditor-debtor relationships. Morrison's reluctant recognition that the World Bank might need to accept credit from Africa represented complete transformation of international financial relationships and acknowledgement of African financial leadership in global markets. Traoré's national television address celebrating the elimination of $28 billion in external debt and achievement of complete financial independence generated massive popular celebrations throughout Burkina Faso as citizens recognized the historic significance of African financial liberation from Western institutional control. The spontaneous street celebrations in Ouagadougou with crowds chanting Traoré reflected popular understanding that African financial independence represented fundamental transformation of continental prospects for development and international relationships based on equality rather than dependency. Traoré's announcement that the African Development Fund positioned Africa as a global creditor rather than debtor created unprecedented pride among African populations who had experienced decades of international characterization as aid recipients and development assistance beneficiaries rather than contributors to global financial stability and development. Morrison's visit to Ouagadougou 1 week after the operation represented complete capitulation of World Bank resistance to African financial independence and acknowledgement that cooperation based on equality had become necessary for institutional survival and continued relevance in transformed global financial markets. Morrison's humble approach to requesting cooperation with Africa represented dramatic reversal of traditional institutional arrogance and acknowledgement that African financial innovations had established new global standards for development finance and monetary system management. Traoré's diplomatic response emphasizing African openness to cooperation while establishing new terms based on equality rather than dependency demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to leverage financial advantages for beneficial international relationships while maintaining African independence and sovereignty. Morrison's acceptance of equal partnership terms rather than traditional donor-recipient relationships represented institutional acknowledgement of fundamental changes in global financial power distribution and African emergence as major players in international development finance. 6 months after the operation, the African Development Fund had provided $200 billion in credit to 25 countries, exceeding the World Bank's annual lending capacity while also demonstrating African capability to manage large-scale international development financing operations. Bloomberg special report declaring that Traoré's 72-hour operation changed global finance and recognizing Africa's rise to creditor status represented authoritative international acknowledgement of the historic significance of African financial achievements and their implications for future global financial relationships. Morrison's regular consultations with Traoré for strategic advice represented complete reversal of traditional advisory relationships as Western institutional leaders sought to learn from African innovations in monetary policy and development finance management. Traoré's modest explanation that success resulted from correct strategy, proper timing, and African people's strength rather than magic reflected African philosophical approaches to achievement that emphasized practical planning and community support rather than individual genius or exceptional circumstances. Financial Times headlines declaring new financial order. Africa leads, West follows reflected comprehensive international media recognition of fundamental shifts in global financial leadership and the emergence of new patterns of international monetary cooperation based on African innovation and leadership. Traoré's address to the African Economic Summit emphasizing that 72 hours, sometimes changing the world doesn't require long time, just correct plan and determination, provided inspirational validation of African capabilities while also offering strategic insights about effective approaches to achieving rapid transformation of international relationships. Jennifer Brooks's transformation from shocked opponent to admiring student represented broader patterns of Western professional recognition that African leadership had achieved results that exceeded traditional Western institutional capabilities and strategic thinking. Brooks's LinkedIn article acknowledging learning from Traoré that vision and courage make impossible things possible demonstrated personal and professional growth through recognition of African excellence and innovative approaches to international financial challenges. The success of Traoré's 72-hour operation in transforming Africa from debtor to creditor status represented one of the most rapid and comprehensive reversals of international financial relationships in modern history, while also establishing new models for achieving monetary independence and development finance leadership. Morrison's final visit to learn about Africa's plans to establish the continent as the global financial center reflected continued Western recognition that African innovations were setting new standards for international monetary policy and development finance management. Traoré's ambitious goal of making AfriGold the world's reserve currency within 5 years, surpassing the dollar and euro, represented continued visionary thinking about African potential for global financial leadership while also demonstrating confidence in continental capabilities for sustained innovation and international market leadership. Wall Street Journal chief economist Professor David Chen's assessment that Traoré's 72-hour operation represents the biggest change in finance since Bretton Woods provided authoritative academic validation of the historic significance of African achievements for global monetary system transformation. Traoré's concluding statement that 72 hours was sufficient for Africa's freedom. Now the goal is global financial leadership, and we have sufficient time for that too reflected continued confidence in African capabilities while also outlining ambitious goals for future continental achievements in international financial leadership and monetary system innovation.